Welcome to the Catholic Foodie Show. I'm Jeff Young, your host, the Catholic Foodie. So glad that you could be here today, and happy Epiphany, by the way. Today is the feast day of the Epiphany, the traditional feast day, right? It's January 6th, the 12th. You've heard of that, right? You've heard about the 12 days of Christmas, 12th night, and all of that. That's today. Today is the Feast of the Epiphany, January 6th. This is the traditional date of the celebration of Epiphany. Now, if you're Catholic and you're in the United States, then you celebrated the Epiphany on Sunday, this past Sunday, January 3rd. And that is because, for certain pastoral reasons, the bishops decide to move certain feast days. Now, we do have some feast days throughout the year in the liturgical calendar that change every year, right? I mean, you think about Ash Wednesday, right? Lent. But see, it all hinges on Easter, the date of Easter. So Ash Wednesday is going to depend on when Easter is, and how does that date get set? Well, I'm not prepared to go into all the specifics of the date. However, I can tell you that it's based on the moon. Believe it or not, Easter was in the very beginning, that feast day, even for the Jews, was a lunar feast. It was a harvest feast. And so it depended on the lunar cycle. And that's why we have different dates. Now, there are different dates in Christendom for Easter. The Western Church and the Eastern Church oftentimes have different dates, different calculations. And it's interesting because I think it was 2 years ago, it actually ended up being the same. Isn't that wild? So I'm sure that we could get into all the particulars. I don't want to do that today. I just want to make a point that we're accustomed to this. Some feast days change from year to year. Ash Wednesday, Mardi Gras, of course, down here in South Louisiana, got to mention that, is dependent on Ash Wednesday. But one thing that doesn't change, we do have some feast days that don't change because they're based on lunar feasts or lunar cycles or anything like that. They change simply because they fall at a bad time. Sometimes Ascension traditionally has been what? A Thursday, right? Ascension Thursday. Well, typically in the United States, that is going to be moved to the closest Sunday. Why? So that more of the faithful can participate in the liturgy. And I understand that. That's a very good thing. And with our hectic lives today, we have to bend the rules a little bit in this respect. I mentioned on Monday's show that I'm a little bit more of a liturgical and historical purist. I like to keep the how and the why of things intact. The reason that things came about and how they first were. I kind of like that. I kind of like to keep that intact. But I understand that certain feast days have to be moved, and so we have Ascension Thursday moved. We have Epiphany moved. Just for me, for whatever reason, well, I think I kind of know the reason. For me, the Epiphany is something that I would prefer to be kept on January 6th. Why? Well, down here in South Louisiana, we're going to be talking about king cake today, folks. I got to tell you, we just have to. But here in South Louisiana, New Orleans in particular, this is king cake season. This is carnival season. Today kicks off carnival season. As a matter of fact, most of the businesses, most of the regular people in and around New Orleans in South Louisiana, they have no clue that the Epiphany was celebrated on Sunday. Why? Because everybody knows that the Epiphany is celebrated on January 6th. And for a long, long time, the businesses, the bakeries, the stores, the grocery stores, for a long, long time, they respected that date and did not start to make king cakes until today. January 6th. Now, unfortunately, I have to say, it's just not that way anymore. It's kind of like Christmas, the commercialization of Christmas that has happened, unfortunately, and in the way that has impacted our shopping, the way it's impacted our decorating, the way it's impacted the way that we see and view the Advent season, and also the Christmas season, and how it comes to an end right there on December 26th. See, that is the influence of just secular culture, and always rushing to get to the next great thing. And same thing we could see happening, or I should say, I guess it is rushing to get to the next great thing. We could say the same thing about carnival season, king cake season. So nowadays, instead of waiting until January 6th, that traditional date, which was sort of kept holy in a way, bakeries, grocery stores, chain stores even start to produce or start to make their king cakes early. And there's some places where it's unfortunate. Some places you can get a king cake year round, and that's just not right? It's just not right. That's not what it's all about. But folks, we are going to be talking about king cakes today. I've got a number of things I want to share with you. We're going to talk about some king cake traditions. We're going to talk about, a king cake recipe. I have a recipe to give to you today. You don't have to go out to the store and buy one. You don't have to order one, although you can order them. They do have them available online. And we're going to talk about just a little bit about king cake celebrations in different parts of the world. New Orleans is not unique in this respect. There are other places around the world that celebrate king cakes, and we're going to kind of delve just a little bit into perhaps the history of this tradition. Where does it come from? It is based on faith. Originally, it came from our Catholic faith. New Orleans, it's interesting. I have folks, good Catholic people who come to visit from time to time in New Orleans, and they don't quite know, if it's their first visit, they don't quite know what to think. Because you look at the news, you look at MTV, you look at in other media outlets and the way that they present New Orleans. It's a big party city, which it is. Everybody, I think, has the idea of New Orleans as being what you might find on Bourbon Street in the French Quarter in the middle of Mardi Gras. But that's not really right. It's not really accurate, right? It's just Bourbon Street is one street in the middle of one city, right? In the middle of a state, in the middle of a world. It's just one street. And so the rest of the city is not necessarily like that. And Bourbon Street itself isn't necessarily like the way it's portrayed all the time. And I had a point to this. What was my point? My point is that folks come down here to visit. They don't quite know what to make. Why? Because there's a lot of cultural Catholicism. Louisiana was founded, right, by Catholics. It was a tremendous Catholic influence in Louisiana, and in the city of New Orleans has been historically for years and years and years. And so there is a Catholicism here. There is a cultural Catholicism, a common Catholicism that people just accept and acknowledge without even thinking about it. I'll give you an example. Fridays in Lent. It is not uncommon for non-Catholics to give things up for Lent. First of all, it's not uncommon for them to abstain from meat on Fridays in Lent. As a matter of fact, and I love this, driving around town on Fridays, you see all the Knights of Columbus, different parishes all over will have fish fries on Fridays in Lent. And it's a good thing because it raises money for good works. It raises money for charity. It raises money for some of the great works that the Knights of Columbus do throughout the year. That's a fantastic thing. It also helps other, parishes that need to raise money for whatever outreaches that they do. It's a good thing. But I always just get this big smile on my face when I drive down the road and I see a big billboard or some other kind of sign out advertising the fish fry of the Lenten fish fries of the Protestant churches. I just love it. I love it because you see that a lot of folks down here are closer to Catholicism than they think they are. Right, than they're aware of. And I think that's just so cool. So this is one of them, king cakes, even to see the non-Catholics have this respect of wanting to hold on to, okay, it's January 6th. I saw it today on social media all over the place. People posting about now they got their first king cake, right, today. Now, the truth is the stores have had them in stock, for the last week, if not longer. But it's so cool to see all these people who may not have darkened the door of a church in a long, long time. They're going to hold off. They're going to wait for January 6th. So at least there's a little inkling there, right? Of a sense of faith, of a sense of awe and maybe respect for something. So it's at least a little doorway there. It's common ground as well. It's a good place to start a conversation about faith, to talk to people about faith around the table with a king cake. So we'll be talking king cake today. I have to admit, I have not made one yet, but this Sunday, I think, is going to be the day. It'll be the first day. It's just, for me, it's just time and schedule. I haven't had a chance to make one. I did have a temptation, I admit, to make a king cake this past Sunday, since it was liturgically celebrated as the feast of the Epiphany. But when I even brought the idea up to my wife, she looked at me. She's like, well, it's not really the Epiphany. You see, it's entrenched in us. It's ingrained in us here. This belief that we have to celebrate on, the Epiphany on what? January 6th, right? It's King's Day, for goodness sake. Look, we are approaching our first break, folks, and I want to invite you to go to breadboxmedia.com. We have a little survey. We want to know how you tend to listen to the shows here on Breadbox Media. Do you listen to just the podcast? Do you download just a podcast? Do you go to Podbean to listen? Do you listen live from the website? Do you listen through iTunes? How do you listen? We have a lot of things that we're doing in 2016, and this would be a big help for us if you were to just go to breadboxmedia.com. It would take you literally 30 seconds, right, to go there and to simply click on that link to take the survey, and it's just answer a question. That's all it is. You just click a box, and that's all it is. But it helps us to prepare. So we got to take a break. We'll be back in just a minute. Don't go away. Welcome back to the Catholic Foodie Show. I'm Jeff Young, your host, the Catholic Foodie. We're talking today about the Feast of the Epiphany and also King Cake. Epiphany is also called King's Day in a lot of places. It's the day that we celebrate when the three wise men, or the three kings, as they are also known, visited Jesus, right? When they follow the star to Bethlehem. And they come and they present to Jesus gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. And there's a lot of layers to this story. There's a lot of things that we could talk about. Epiphany. What does it mean? Epiphany. If you have an epiphany, what do you have? You have this realization. The Epiphany was like this manifestation of God, of God's presence. I mean, you can imagine Mary and Joseph. All these things happened that seem so spectacular. And I don't know if you've seen the movie, The Nativity Story. It was, I think it came out into theaters just a couple of years ago. I don't know, 2, 3, 4 years ago. I'm terrible with time. Time just goes too fast for me to keep up. But The Nativity Story is something that we like to watch every year around this time, right? Christmas time. And of course, with any sort of art like this, we could criticize it, right? We can critique it. There are things about it we like, things about it we don't like. Well, one of the things that I really do like about that movie, that film, that portrayal of this amazing story of God becoming man in Jesus of Nazareth, this whole story, the way that it portrays it, the one thing that really just gets to me is the fact that it's so ordinary. It's so plain. In my mind, you kind of think of how spectacular it must have been for the angel to appear to the shepherds. You must have, think about how amazing it was for the angel to appear to Mary, to Gabriel, to appear to her, and for the Annunciation, inviting her to be the mother of God, the mother of Jesus, the mother of Messiah, the Savior. And to me, it's just like, oh my goodness, if an angel appeared to me, when I was young, I thought it'd be cool, but if an angel appeared to me today, I'd probably die, it'd scare me to death. But the way this movie portrays the story and the details of the story is just in such an ordinary way. From Zechariah in the temple offering incense, and the way that Gabriel spoke to him, and then he's rendered mute, right? That part to the Annunciation with Gabriel and Mary, to the angel's appearance to Joseph in the dream, to the appearance of the angel to the shepherds. All of it was just so ordinary. There were no fireworks. There were no, awesome special effects or anything like that. You didn't have the angels singing Hosanna in the highest where everybody in the world could hear it. It was a lot of silence. It was just so ordinary, so plain, And it made me think that maybe there are a lot of times in my life that God comes to me and God's doing things in my life in a way that's just so plain, just ordinary, that there's no fireworks. There's nothing spectacular. There's nothing that's announcing. There's no trumpet blaring, and announcing ahead of time, God's doing this in you. Instead, it's just ho-hum, the everyday. And it's just amazing to me to see that, because it opens up my eyes to see that God really is working in my life and in the lives of other people in ways that don't have to be spectacular. They are really deeply, profoundly spectacular, but they just seem so normal, so ordinary, so plain. And that's just amazing to me. And so when you think about these traditions, right, we talk about this feast day where God is manifested to the world. You think of what Mary and Joseph how they must have felt. They go through this whole thing where Mary had to have a lot of faith that the word that the angel spoke was going to be fulfilled. And I mean, I can imagine, again, in my imagination, it's kind of a stretch, but I can kind of see Mary as, even when these good things happen, these miraculous things happen, she conceives miraculously. Wow. Like, that's never happened before, And you see this, I can imagine her experience. She witnesses this. She holds these things in her heart. She ponders on them. But it doesn't make the crucifixion any easier. It doesn't make losing him in Jerusalem when he's 12 years old at the temple any easier, right? I've had incredible experiences in prayer with God. I've seen miracles happen. And guess what? Sometimes just the ho-hum of every day, the drag and drain and pull of everyday life makes me forget. I just forget the things that I've seen. I forget what God has done. And I can imagine, Mary probably gets into a little routine of getting up, making breakfast, making lunch, making dinner, loving Joseph and loving Jesus as Jesus is growing up. Kind of getting into this routine and maybe just not being 100% like in awe constantly, which is what I would have think that I would be, which I know it wouldn't happen. I think I would want myself to be in awe all the time, but I'm human. And so I forget. And it's just kind of the humdrum, And so you see how they went through all of this drama, but in a really kind of normal way, with the Annunciation, and Mary's pregnant, and she's helping Elizabeth, and she sees this miracle of Zechariah getting his voice back, and the baby being born, and the experience of the babe leaping in Elizabeth's womb, when Mary comes, and the awe it must have brought up in Mary when Elizabeth greeted her the way she did. We still pray those words today in the Hail Mary. It's amazing to me. We still pray those words today. But what did that do for Mary? I mean, she the way that Luke records it, at least, she was so overwhelmed and overjoyed that she broke out in song, right? The Magnificat, we call it. That's just amazing to me. It must have bolstered her own faith so much because she knew about the angel. She experienced it. Joseph didn't even know. Joseph was told later in a dream, right? But Mary knew, and she shows up, and Elizabeth knows that Mary is pregnant and knows who the baby is, that the baby is the Messiah. Man, I mean, it's just things that are just so normal, natural, every day, and yet it is totally imbued with God, totally imbued with God's grace. And that to me is just amazing. So they go through this whole ordeal of having to travel to Bethlehem. None of it's easy. God didn't make the mountains fall down to the ground and lift up the valleys and make it a straight path. They didn't get like a Corvette or an Uber, somebody to drive them to Bethlehem, right? They had to make that hard journey. It was a very hard journey. And she was pregnant. Very difficult journey. I'm sure a very scary journey too. The travel in those days was not as fun as it can be today. I mean, sometimes it could be scary too, but back then you had a lot of problems with thieves, robbers, bandits, people who were up to no good and had no good intentions for you. You had to be careful. You had to be very careful. And so they made that hard journey. And so they get there, and then of course the surprise, right? Jesus, it's time for his birth. He's coming. And they finally find a place. There's no room in the inn, but they find a place. God provides a place. It's not the perfect place, but it's a place. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, totally unannounced, these three wise men show up. These three kings show up. And they know who the child is. They know who the baby is. And they reverence and worship that baby. I mean, can you imagine what that must have done to the faith of both Mary and Joseph to see that? Other people know. God is talking to other people too. God is telling them. God is taking care of every little detail. He's preparing the way. He doesn't wave a magic wand and take away all the pain. He doesn't take away all the heartache. He doesn't take away all the hard stuff that we have to go through in life as human beings. He doesn't do that. But he takes care of every detail in the ordinary, everyday way. And to me, I don't know, that just speaks to me so profoundly. And so as I was saying earlier, there's so many different layers to this story. I mean, we could look at it from the standpoint of God manifesting himself to the world. We can see how the three wise men are representative of how salvation is coming not only to the Jews, but to the entire world. It's a prefigurement of what we're going to see when St. Paul becomes the apostle to the Gentiles. It's amazing, the beauty of God and the beauty of the details that are in these stories is just, it's amazing, absolutely amazing. So those are some of the layers of things that we can look at, and is it any wonder that in the ordinariness of our human lives, where we get up and we eat, we make breakfast and lunch and dinner, we go to work, we come home from work, we spend time with our family, we go to bed, we get up the next day, we do it all again. That in the ordinariness of our lives, that we have these moments, we try to carve out these moments and these activities as something sacred, as something holy, as something special. And I'm talking about special meals. I'm talking about time around the table with your family for the holidays, for Christmas, a time at church, time in prayer, whether that prayer is at church in an adoration chapel or at home. We got to take a break. We're already there. We got to take a break. You're listening to the Catholic Foodie Show here on Breadbox Media. Don't go away. We'll be back in just a minute. Welcome back to the Catholic Foodie Show. I'm Jeff Young, your host, the Catholic Foodie. And man, I almost missed that break. I was going too long. I got all caught up in all the stuff I was saying, sharing with you. That happens to me from time to time. I can't help that. But I was talking about the ordinariness of life and how we set aside these times to celebrate these things that are holy and sacred. and are important, right? Important. And this is one of them. We develop these traditions. The rosary, beautiful, beautiful tradition. And we pray the rosary. My family, my wife and my children and I, we try to pray the rosary during Advent and during Christmas together as a family as often as possible. There's certain days that we do pray the rosary together, but during these special times, these special seasons, and Lent is one of them, we try to do it every day, and it's tough. It's hard. Like last night, we were up, I think, at 10:30, still trying to pray the rosary. But so we have these traditions, and they're so important to hold on to these traditions. And one of the traditions, the one that I want to talk to you about today, that has to do with the Epiphany, is this thing called a king cake. And I have a little sound clip I'm going to play for you here because I don't want you talking, or I don't want you to hear just my voice about all this. I'd love to hear your voice sometimes. We've talked about resolutions this week. I'm still going to say a few things about resolutions, New Year resolutions over the next couple of days. I'd love to hear what your resolutions are. I'd love to hear if you have any traditions around the Epiphany. You can always call, leave me voice feedback that I could play right here on the show by calling 985-635-4974, 985-635-4974. Call that, leave a message, and I can play it right here on the show. Now, in the meantime, I have a video clip here. It's a very short clip, less than a minute and a half. It's going to give you a quick overview of the king cake, what it's all about, a little bit about where it comes from originally, but mainly what the tradition is like today. It's kind of fun. Produced by GoNola.com. You'll find they produce a lot of videos, a lot of content centered around New Orleans. I love the stuff that they produce. There is a Lauren Tom. You may have heard her name. She's been featured on a lot of major networks. I'm thinking back to the Saints winning the Super Bowl. I'm thinking back to some scandals involving the fleur-de-lis emblem, her speaking out about that. She owns some shops in New Orleans. She's also known on social media as Flirty Girl, like fleur-de-lis, Flirty Girl. And so she's the one whose voice you're going to hear here, New Year's, here. You're going to hear her in this video. She's a great spokesperson for New Orleans and for New Orleans culture and cuisine as well. So let's take a listen real quick, a little bit about king cakes in New Orleans.
When it's carnival time in New Orleans, people line up at places like Randazzo's Bakery to buy what's called a king cake. It's a very deep tradition here in New Orleans, and if you're visiting during Mardi Gras, you'll want to know what this is and what it's all about.
The King's Day that just starts everything off for our Mardi Gras season, and it actually had its roots started with the religious roots in the three wise men in search of baby Jesus, and on the Epiphany, and that was the day that he was shown to the world. So to keep that tradition, they made a little pastry, and they inserted it way back when it was like a bean, and whoever got the bean was like the king of the day, and it represented the finding of the baby Jesus. So it evolved to the plastic baby. Whoever gets the baby has to buy the next king cake, basically. So it's all about the baby. If you didn't have the baby in there, you wouldn't have a king cake. So the tradition just keeps going on, all throughout till Mardi Gras Day. It's just a very good feeling, to carry that tradition on, and it's just a very festive atmosphere.
You got the baby? Yay! You gotta bring the next king cake. You don't have to be in New Orleans to enjoy a king cake. You can also order them, and they can ship anywhere around the country. Well, I'm Flirty Girl, and that wraps up another edition of GoNola TV, and we'll see you next time, darling.
I love it. This is a video, by the way, and I'm going to embed that video over at CatholicFoodie.com. It'll be in the show notes for today's show, January 6th. At CatholicFoodie.com. And, they talked about a little bit about the origins, the beginnings of this tradition. I think a lot of it goes back overall, right? Overall, a lot of it goes back to the common people. Common people having a day. Mardi Gras itself goes back to this. The common people having a day where they can be like royalty. A lot of cultures around the world have celebrations like this, where the commoners, and this is historic, not just today, but historically, there have been a lot of cultures throughout the years, throughout the centuries, that have had celebrations like this, where on a given day, the common people get to have a feast or a ball or a party or a dance or whatever it may be, a big, huge party, where among them are chosen people who could be like king and queen for the day. So that whole idea, that concept is not new. It's very old in human history, and it happened here in the New World too. In New Orleans, we had a couple hundred years ago. I mean, New Orleans was very different than it is today. All of the United States was very different than it is today, and you did have settlers here. And so this was part of these traditions. And Mardi Gras came around, and we can argue round and round about where Mardi Gras came from, Mobile or New Orleans or whatever. But it stayed here in New Orleans. Just put it that way. But overall, in general, right, it was that kind of a celebration. And one of the things that happened, again, you're talking about a very Catholic culture at the time. So Catholic theology kind of plays a part in this. If you look at a king cake itself, what does it look like? First of all, it's round, right? It's round, and that's the symbolism there is for it's kind of like a crown. Right? It's a crown for a king. It designates royalty. You can see that again on many different levels, not just the level of Jesus as being the king, but also King's Day, the Epiphany. It could be the whole concept, the idea of the commoners being royalty for a day, king and queen for a day. So it has a lot of applications here. You see also the fact that there is a baby, a little plastic baby inside, and everybody knows that, right? Everybody knows that. So, and it's added, by the way, after the king cake is baked. You don't want to add a plastic baby to a king cake before it's baked, because that would yield what? Melted plastic baby inside of a cake, and nobody wants that. So you add it after the cake is baked and cooled. But originally it wasn't a plastic baby. They didn't have plastic back then. They would use something else. They would use a little bean, a dried bean, maybe a fava bean or some other kind of bean. Or they would use a nut like a pecan or something along those lines. And then over time, there were other traditions. I remember reading a book, kind of reviewing the history of this. I'm going from memory now because this was a couple of years ago and I was doing some research on it. I do recall that there was a tradition in New Orleans, and this was after Mardi Gras was already in full swing, like the tradition of Mardi Gras, which in New Orleans goes back to the late 1800s, and So this had already been established. So it was probably in the early 1900s. I was reading about this, where what they would do to try to choose who was going to be like the queen, and then the court. You had to have all these. You'd have these debutantes that were part of this. They were part of a certain section of society. They had means. They had money. So they were not necessarily at this point commoners. We would think of, but they did have some means there, and so they were part of this celebration where they would announce. They would find out who was going to be the queen, who was going to be part of the court, and the way they would do that, they would bake this big cake, and then they had these little medallions or little I'm trying to think of a term. I can't think of one, but like metal, some sort of metal images, right? Like one would be like a little shoe or a crown or whatever, kind of like a little pendant, you would find today for jewelry, that kind of a thing, tied to a ribbon, and they would all be inserted, kind of laying under the cake. So you couldn't see them. All you could see were the ribbons. And at a certain point of the evening, there'd be a ceremony. They'd pull the ribbons, and we'd find out who was going to be part of the court, who was going to be part of the, who's going to be the queen or whatever. So you've had different traditions happen over time. That is not what happens today. I mean, today's a little bit different in the way that as far as king cakes in general go. But you have it's round for a crown. The baby Jesus, is the symbol behind the pecan or the bean or the plastic baby. It is the baby Jesus. So you have that symbolism there of the wise men, the kings searching for Jesus. And it's really about finding Jesus. And as a Christian, as a Catholic, of course, that can be the greatest implication for us. Now, the colors, traditionally, the colors of Mardi Gras are gold, green, gold, and purple. And this was actually established early on. I think it was back in 1892. It was the king that year of Carnival, Rex, chose those colors for this reason. He wanted to designate a meaning to the colors. And so purple was for justice, green was for faith, and faith was very important, and then gold for power. And so these three colors stuck for some reason, and then they have been associated with Mardi Gras ever since. And so you'll see a king cake decorated with these colors, purple, green, and gold. And so we are actually back up against a break. We're running out of time today. I still got to get my recipe to you. We're going to try to take care of that at the very beginning of the next segment. So don't go away. Stay tuned. You're listening to the Catholic Foodie Show here on Breadbox Media, and we'll be back in just a minute. Welcome back to the Catholic Foodie Show. I'm Jeff Young, your host, the Catholic Foodie. So glad that you were listening today. We're talking king cake. Why? Because today is the feast day of, at least traditionally, historically, the Feast of Epiphany, right? January 6th. It is a big celebration. Lots of king cakes. I can't remember. I do have statistics over at CatholicFoodie.com. I have statistics. I have to find those and put them in the show notes. I should have looked that up for you now for the show. Sorry, I didn't, but it is amazing. It's a tremendous business, this king cake production thing. King cakes are shipped all over the world. On this video that you heard a little sound clip last segment. That was Laura and Tom was at Randazzo's. Randazzo is one of the most famous king cake bakeries. Matter of fact, they have locations that are opened up only during Carnival season every year, which goes from today, January 6th, until the end of Fat Tuesday, the end of Mardi Gras Day. And that's it. And those bakeries are open and they're in operation only those periods of time. It's pretty amazing. They ship those things out all over the world. But I'm going to tell you today how to make one so you don't have to order one. And it's just so cool because I've had, over the years, I have talked about this. My recipe has been up over at CatholicFoodie.com for, 6 years now. And I've had people over the years contact me, thanking me for it, telling me about how they brought it to their family. Or they brought it to, I have teachers like Barb in Nebraska. Barb in Nebraska, very popular on the social networks, Facebook and Twitter and all of that. Barb in Nebraska is a teacher, and she has brought king cake and that whole traditional view of the images, the symbolism of the king cake to her students at school. And it's just been so awesome to get her feedback and how much the kids loved it and all of that. So, I want to share that with you today, that recipe, which is not really mine per se. I got it from Emerald Lagasse. It's his recipe that I've just tweaked to my liking, but I did not come up with it on my own. A couple of things I could say about king cake, though. There's so many different ways to prepare it. If you go online, you look up recipes, there are so many different ways. But the New Orleans standard, right? The New Orleans king cake, if you want an authentic king cake, is going to be a brioche, right? Which is a French bread, really. It's a type of bread that has so many different applications. You could use it to make different types of bread. You can use it to make different types of cake. And that's exactly what we're doing here with this brioche, is making a king cake. So it's going to be sweet, but what makes it a brioche? What is unique or distinctive about a brioche is the amount of butter and the amount of egg yolks that you use. What it does is going to yield a bread or a cake that's going to be very golden in color because of all the egg yolks. And the butter, using the amount of butter that you use, it gives the feel of the dough and of the finished product of the bread itself. It gives it the, I won't say appearance, because it's more than appearance. It's appearance, but also the feel of being wetter than it really is, or moister than it really is. And that's what the butter does. Now, one of the things that's really awesome about a brioche is that the texture, the consistency and texture of the dough makes it very easy to braid, which is why you're going to find a lot of king cakes in New Orleans. Different bakeries do this. They will braid the king cakes. They braid them and they have it, kind of woven in and out, which adds a whole new layer to the symbolism if you think about it. Pretty cool. The one that I make at home, the one that I guess over time, people who have had the king cake, they just absolutely love it the way that we do it, which is not, I'm not trying to toot my own horn. Matter of fact, I really have turned this over to, just because my work schedule doesn't allow it, to my wife and my daughters. They love to do the king cakes every year, and they do a fantastic job. So it's not really about me. It's just the recipe is a good recipe. It's a solid recipe. And if you follow it, you can make one just like I do. And it's great. And people love it. And it's unique because you get a quality from a homemade king cake that you really can't get in the ones that are mass produced. Now, if I'm going to buy one from some bakery, then it's going to be Randazzo's. That's just my favorite. Or I'm going to get it from Nana Randazzo's has a bakery. She's part of the Randazzo family, has her own bakery up here, not too far from me. Fantastic king cakes as well. But I honestly prefer to have it right here from home. Now, I'll tell you, too, that Willa Jean, which is part of the John Besh restaurant group. Willa Jean is a restaurant down in New Orleans. They're producing a king cake that is just so decadent. It makes you want to slap your mama, okay? It is just so decadent, it's ridiculous. And last year, they did the office, John Besh's office, called me up. I've been honored to have him on the radio, not just the Catholic Foodie Show, but also the local show I do in New Orleans and Baton Rouge, and had him on the radio a number of times. I try to help spread the word whenever the John Besh Foundation or the restaurant group has any good things going on. I like to help spread the word about that. And as a thank you, they contacted me last Carnival season and said, "Hey, you would have to be in town right now, huh?" And I said, "Yeah, actually, I'm here." They said, "Well, come on by. We've got something for you." Well, I show up and they gave me one of these king cakes. It was unbelievable. What a treat. It was an unbelievable treat. So I'm going to put a picture of that up at CatholicFoodie.com for the show notes. You can see that. And if we have time today, I'll try to talk a little bit more about it. But I'm kind of looking at the clock thinking there's a lot more I want to talk about, especially as far as the actually making a king cake and what it's all about. So I told you a little bit about it. It's a brioche. And let me see if I could pull up the recipe here. I actually have a clip of Emerald making this, but I just don't think we're going to have time to hear that today. We're running out of time. So what I'll probably do is put that in the show notes over at CatholicFoodie.com. You can watch him do it. It's about a 5 minute, 45 second clip, and you can see the whole process. He makes it look very simple. And it really isn't that complicated. I am trying to pull up the recipe now. I think this is it. All right, here's what you need if you're going to make the king cake. Here's what you need. You need 2 packets of active dry yeast. We're talking about 4.5 teaspoons here. I have a cup of granulated sugar, 1.5 sticks of butter, melted, 1 cup of warm milk. You want it to be about 110 degrees. You don't want it to be too hot because what you're going to do is dissolve the yeast in the milk. All right, you're going to kind of activate the yeast in the milk. You need 5 large egg yolks, room temperature. And if you look at the recipe, I kind of go through how to take the yolk separate the yolk from the whites. It's kind of fun. I like doing that. I could do that probably all day. It's a lot of fun, really. You need kosher flour. 4.5 cups of flour, all-purpose flour. Kosher salt, 2 teaspoons. 1 teaspoon of freshly grated nutmeg. A teaspoon of grated lemon zest. A teaspoon of oil. And it could be any kind of oil. I tend to use either butter or I use regular olive oil. You also need 1 pound of cream cheese at room temperature, 3.5 cups of confectioner's sugar, 1 plastic king cake baby, or you could use a pecan, or you could use a bean, a dry bean, like a red bean maybe, or some other kind of bean, fava bean. Fava beans are big. That'll work. 5 tablespoons of milk. This is going to be set aside. That's separate. It's going to be room temperature milk. 3 tablespoons of fresh lemon juice, and then purple, green, and yellow food coloring. Now for the dough, this is what you're going to do. You want to combine the yeast and the granulated sugar in the bowl of a stand mixer fitted with a dough hook. Now, if you don't have a stand mixer, don't worry. You can do the same thing by hand, just in a large mixing bowl, preferably a big glass mixing bowl. You want to add the melted butter, the warm milk, and then beat for 1 minute at medium-low speed. If you don't have that, you can be mixing it with your hands and maybe with a big fork or something and working it that way. If you have a stand mixer, then with the mixer running, you want to add the egg yolks and beat that for another minute. Then you want to add the flour, the salt, the nutmeg, the lemon zest, and beat until everything is incorporated. Increase the speed to high and beat until the dough pulls away from the sides of the bowl and forms a ball or starts to climb up the dough hook. As with any dough, you may have to add water, like a little tablespoon at a time, or more flour to get the right consistency or the right result. You could even add more milk instead of water. Remove the dough hook from the bowl, and then using your hands, form it into a smooth ball. Use regular olive oil, not extra virgin, because that's going to leave another taste, but just maybe regular olive oil or some other kind of oil, and lightly oil a large mixing bowl. Place the dough in the bowl, roll it around to coat it on all sides, and then cover the bowl with plastic wrap, set it aside in a warm, draft-free place for about 2 hours. What you're looking for is you want the dough to double in size. In the meantime, while you're waiting, you can take a large mixing bowl and combine the cream cheese and then 1/2 cup of the confectioner's sugar. You want to blend it using a fork, or if you have an electric mixer, you can do that on low speed and set aside. And what it does is really going to fluff. It's going to fluff up a lot, and it tastes good. Add that little sugar to that stuff. I have a hard time keeping my hand out of it. And then once it is the dough has doubled in size, you want to turn the dough onto a lightly floured surface. Use your hands or a rolling pin, roll it out into a big rectangle about 30 inches long and 6 inches wide. You take the cream cheese filling and spread it out lengthwise over the bottom half of the dough. Then you want to flip that top half over. So what you're doing is you're rolling it out in a big rectangle, putting the filling on half of the side of it, and then flipping that over, and you're going to seal it around, and you're going to make that into a big circle. Okay, and we are running out of time, so I'm going to try to run through this. You got to make sure your oven's preheated at 350. You know what? I'm not going to run through it because it's too fast. I can't talk that fast. The rest of this recipe is going to be on the website, CatholicFoodie.com, in the show notes. You're going to find it there. I do have a post for it. I'm going to actually post also the entire recipe right there in the show notes, so you don't have to click on multiple things to get to it. It is so worth it. It takes a little bit of effort and time. I can't lie. It will. But I can tell you this. It's going to be worth it. You're going to be famous. You're going to be Facebook famous when you take pictures of it and post it. You're going to be famous with your friends and your family when you invite them over. It's going to be awesome. And you got to let me know. If you make it, let me know. And thank you again. Thank you so much for listening to the Catholic Foodie Show. Jeff Young here, your host, the Catholic Foodie. I will be talking to you tomorrow. Until then, bon appetit.